Sometimes love finds you when you're running towards safety. Sometimes it finds you when you're running from everything you've ever known. In 1882, in the sprawling territory of Montana, Sheriff Marcus Steele Donovan stood 6 feet 8 inches tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun, hands scarred from 8 years of building something from nothing, and eyes the color of storm clouds that had seen too much violence for any man's peace of mind. Miss Evangeline Hartwell clutched her carpetbag with trembling fingers as the stagecoach rattled away, leaving her alone on the dusty main street of Ironwood Creek with nothing but a teaching contract, $47, and the desperate hope that 1,000 miles would be enough distance between her and the scandal that had destroyed her life in Boston. "I've been fighting outlaws for 8 years to build this kingdom," the sheriff had told the town council just that morning, his deep voice carrying the weight of every battle, every sleepless night, every choice that had cost him pieces of his soul. "Now I need a queen." But could a woman fleeing her past become the partner of a man still fighting for his future? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun painted Ironwood Creek in shades of gold and amber as Evangeline stepped down from the stagecoach, her dark blue traveling dress already collecting dust from the frontier wind. She had imagined many things about the Montana Territory during her 3-week journey west, but nothing had prepared her for the sight of the man who now approached her with the measured stride of someone accustomed to command. Sheriff Marcus Donovan removed his hat as he neared, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. His badge caught the sunlight, but it was his eyes that held her attention, gray as winter sky, watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken despite her exhaustion. "Miss Hartwell, I presume?" His voice rumbled like distant thunder, and when she nodded, he gestured toward her bags. "Allow me. The schoolhouse is just down the street, and Mrs. Caldwell has prepared rooms for you above the general store." "Thank you, Sheriff." Evangeline tried to keep her voice steady, though something about this man's presence made her feel both safer and more unsettled than she'd felt in months. "I appreciate your courtesy." As they walked, she noticed how the townspeople watched him, not with fear, but with respect. Children ran up to show him carved toys, women nodded with genuine warmth, and men touched their hat brims in acknowledgement. Whatever kingdom he'd built here, it was clearly one his people trusted. 8 years ago, this was nothing but a crossroads and a prayer, Marcus said, seemingly reading her thoughts as she observed the neat storefronts, the white-painted church steeple, the well-maintained boardwalks. Outlaws used it as a hideout. Decent folks were too scared to settle. Now we've got 300 souls, a school, 2 churches, and the safest main street between Billings and Missoula. Evangeline paused at the schoolhouse steps, running her hand along the smooth pine railings. "You built this." Every piece of wood cut and fitted by these hands. He held up calloused palms that told stories of labor and dedication. "Along with half the men in town. Figured if we wanted children to have a future here, they needed proper education." The schoolhouse was beautiful, solid timber construction with large windows to let in natural light, a stone foundation that would last generations, and details that spoke of careful craftsmanship. Inside, she found neat rows of hand-carved desks, a slate board mounted perfectly level, and bookshelves waiting to be filled. "It's wonderful," she breathed, running her fingers along the smooth desktop. "These desks are works of art." Marcus shifted his weight, and for a moment, the imposing sheriff looked almost bashful. "Winter project." Figured the children deserved better than makeshift tables. As they continued to the general store, Evangeline learned more about the town's history. Marcus had arrived as a deputy marshal, pursuing the Harrington gang who'd been terrorizing settlements across 3 territories. When he'd finally cornered them in what was then just a trading post and a few ramshackle buildings, the resulting gunfight had left 2 outlaws dead, 3 captured, and Marcus wounded but victorious. "The territorial governor offered me the sheriff's position," he explained as they climbed the external stairs to her rooms. "Said if I could tame this place, I'd earned the right to shape it." The rooms above the store were simple but clean, a bedroom with an iron-frame bed covered in a wedding ring quilt, a sitting area with a rocking chair positioned near the window, and a small washstand with a mirror that had somehow survived the journey west without a crack. Mrs. Caldwell left fresh bread and preserves, Marcus said, pointing to a cloth-covered basket on the small table. Supper's at the boarding house if you've a mind for company, or she's happy to send a plate up if you need rest. Evangeline set down her carpetbag and turned to thank him, but found herself caught off guard by how he filled the doorway. Not just his size, but his presence. There was something magnetic about Marcus Donovan, something that made her aware of herself as a woman in ways she'd tried to forget. "Sheriff, may I ask you something?" "Marcus." "And yes, ma'am. Why did you really approach me today? I saw you watching the stagecoach before it even stopped." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Because word reached me that you might not be planning to stay. That teaching here might just be a temporary stop before you move on to California or back east." Evangeline's heart skipped. "And if it were, then I'd have to convince you otherwise." The honesty in his voice was startling. "This town needs a teacher, Miss Hartwell. A real one, not someone passing through. These children deserve consistency, and frankly, so do the rest of us. You don't even know if I'm qualified. I know you graduated from the Boston Female Seminary. I know you speak French and Latin. I know you taught at the Whitmore Academy for Young Ladies for 3 years before." He paused, and she realized he knew about the scandal. "Before circumstances brought you west." Heat flooded her cheeks. "Then you know why I can't promise permanence. My reputation. Your reputation here is what you make it." Marcus stepped closer, and she caught the scent of leather and pine soap. "The past doesn't follow you past the mountains, Miss Hartwell. Out here, people judge you by what you do, not what others say you did." That evening, Evangeline sat in the boarding house dining room, sharing a meal of venison stew and cornbread with a dozen townspeople who welcomed her with genuine warmth. Dr. Patricia Morrison, one of the few female physicians in the territory, regaled her with stories of delivering babies during blizzards. Tom Caldwell, who ran the general store with his wife, described the community's plans for a proper library. Sarah Chun, whose husband ran the livery stable, showed her photographs of the one-room schoolhouse they'd outgrown. "Sheriff Donovan's been talking about expanding the school for 2 years," Sarah said with a knowing smile. "Funny how he finally got the Territorial Education Board to approve funding right around the time he heard we might get a real teacher." "The man's got vision," Dr. Morrison added. "When I arrived 5 years ago, half the buildings were still canvas and timber. Now look around. This could be any established town back east, except for the mountains and the freedom." As the evening wore on, Evangeline found herself drawn into planning discussions for the fall term, suggestions for curriculum, and gentle questions about her teaching philosophy. These people weren't just being polite. They genuinely cared about education, about building something lasting for their children. When she finally climbed the stairs to her rooms, she found a package waiting by her door. Inside was a wooden box, expertly crafted with dovetail joints and a fitted lid. The wood was smooth as silk, stained a warm honey color that brought out the grain. Nestled inside on a bed of soft cloth were chalk sticks, a ruler, and a set of pencils sharpened to perfect points. The note was written in careful script, "For the new schoolmarm. May your lessons take root in good soil. M.D." Evangeline traced the wood grain with her fingertip, marveling at the craftsmanship. This wasn't something thrown together. This was a piece made with patience and skill, created specifically for her. The thought sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. The next morning brought her first glimpse of Marcus in his element. She was walking to the schoolhouse early, hoping to organize her supplies before meeting with parents, when shouting erupted from the direction of the saloon. Through the window, she saw 2 men squared off while a crowd gathered. Marcus appeared seemingly from nowhere, moving with surprising grace for such a large man. His voice cut through the commotion like a blade through cloth. "Jacob, Samuel, enough." The 2 men froze, and Evangeline watched as Marcus approached them with his hands visible but ready. Whatever he said was too quiet for her to hear, but within minutes, both men were shaking hands and the crowd was dispersing. "Impressive, isn't he?" Dr. Morrison had appeared beside her. "Most sheriffs would have cracked heads together and thrown them in jail. Marcus finds another way. How does he do it? Respect. Fear's temporary, but respect lasts. Those men know he could break them both in half without breaking a sweat, but they also know he'd rather help them solve their problem than hurt them for having one." The morning flew by as parents brought their children to meet her. She counted 18 students ranging from 6 to 14, bright-eyed, and eager despite their rough frontier clothes. By noon, she was in love with every one of them. Miss Hartwell. A small voice drew her attention to Lucy Chun, Sarah's 8-year-old daughter. Are you really going to stay? The last teacher left after 2 months because she said we were too wild and the town was too rough. Evangeline knelt to Lucy's level, looking into dark eyes that held too much wisdom for such a young face. Do you think it's too rough? No, ma'am. Sheriff Donovan makes it safe. But Lucy bit her lip. Mama says pretty ladies don't usually stay. They go to California where there's fancy things. Lucy, let me tell you a secret. Evangeline leaned closer, speaking conspiratorially. I've seen plenty of fancy things, and none of them were as beautiful as this schoolhouse or as precious as children who want to learn. I think I might be exactly where I belong. The little girl's face lit up like sunrise, and Evangeline felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness she hadn't experienced in months. That afternoon, as she was arranging books on the shelves, heavy footsteps on the porch announced Marcus's arrival. He filled the doorway, hat in hand, watching her with those storm-gray eyes. How was your first day? Perfect. The word surprised her with its honesty. The children are wonderful, the parents are supportive, and this building. She gestured around the classroom. It's everything a teacher could want. Good. He stepped inside, and she noticed he had to duck slightly under the doorframe. I wanted to discuss something with you. A proposition of sorts. Evangeline's pulse quickened. Oh. Marcus moved to the window, looking out at the street he'd helped build. There's trouble coming, Miss Hartwell. The Carmichael Mining Company has been buying up claims around here, and they're not particular about whether the sellers are willing. Their foreman, Wade Buchanan, has territorial political connections and a reputation for getting what he wants. What does that have to do with me? He turned back to her, and she saw something vulnerable flicker across his features before his sheriff's mask slipped back into place. Buchanan's been asking questions about the town, about who holds what influence. He's particularly interested in anyone who might stand in his way. Marcus paused, seeming to weigh his words. A single woman, especially one from back east, might find herself in a difficult position if Buchanan decides she's expendable. Evangeline felt cold despite the warm afternoon. Are you trying to frighten me? I'm trying to protect you. The words came out rougher than he'd intended, and she saw him struggle to find the right tone. Miss Hartwell, Evangeline, I'd like to propose a marriage arrangement. The chalk she'd been holding slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. I beg your pardon. A practical arrangement, he continued quickly, his hands working the brim of his hat. Legal protection for you. Respectability for both of us. You'd keep your position at the school, maintain your own quarters if you wished. I have a house, built it myself, with plenty of room. You'd want for nothing, and Buchanan couldn't touch you. Evangeline stared at him, her mind reeling. You're asking me to marry you for protection? We barely know each other. I'm asking you to marry me because this town needs you, and I need this town to survive. His voice softened. I won't lie and say there isn't more to it than that. I've been watching you since you stepped off that stage, and I see something in you that matches something in me. We're both building new lives here, both trying to create something better than what we left behind. She turned away, walking to the window to collect her thoughts. Outside, children played in the dusty street while their mothers hung laundry and their fathers worked on storefronts and homes. It was peaceful, hopeful, everything she dreamed of when she'd bought her ticket west. What would you expect from such a marriage? Respect, partnership, a chance to see if what I suspect might grow between us has room to flourish. He moved closer, and she could feel his presence like warmth from a fire. I'm not asking for your heart, Evangeline. I'm asking for your trust. When she turned back to face him, she found him closer than expected. This near, she could see the faint scar along his jawline, the laugh lines around his eyes that spoke of better days mixed with the hard ones. He was handsome in a rugged way that had nothing to do with fashion and everything to do with character. I need time to think. Of course. He replaced his hat, tipping it politely. But don't take too long. Buchanan's due back from Helena next week, and I'd rather have things settled before then. After he left, Evangeline sank into her chair, staring at the wooden box he'd made for her. A marriage of convenience to a frontier sheriff she'd known for exactly one day. It was madness. It was also, possibly, salvation. That evening, she found herself walking the perimeter of the town as the sun set behind the mountains. Ironwood Creek was larger than it had appeared from the main street. Neat homes with kitchen gardens, a sawmill powered by the creek that gave the town its name, workshops where the sounds of industry continued even after dark. Every building showed signs of careful planning and quality construction. At the edge of town, she discovered Marcus's house, and her breath caught. It wasn't the rough cabin she'd expected, but a proper two-story home with a wide porch, dormers in the roof, and details that spoke of both skill and vision. Light glowed from the windows, and through one, she could see Marcus at a workbench, his large hands delicately carving something from a piece of maple. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Dr. Morrison's voice startled her from her observations. "I was just walking. I didn't mean to. Nothing wrong with looking." Patricia smiled, joining her on the path. "He's been building that house for 5 years, adding to it every winter. Always said he was making it for a family someday." "Dr. Morrison, may I ask you something confidentially?" "Of course. What kind of man is Sheriff Donovan?" "Truly." Patricia considered the question carefully. "He's the kind of man who spent his first winter here, sharing his one-room cabin with 3 families who had nowhere else to go. The kind who worked 16-hour days for 2 years to get the church built before asking for a single dollar in salary. The kind who's never raised his voice to a child or his hand to anyone who didn't deserve it." She paused, studying Evangeline's face in the growing twilight. "He's also the loneliest man I've ever met. He's built himself a kingdom, as he puts it, but kingdoms are cold places without someone to share them with." That night, Evangeline lay awake listening to the sounds of the frontier, cattle lowing in distant fields, the creek babbling over stones, an owl calling from the pines. Through her window, she could see the mountains silhouetted against star-filled sky, and for the first time in months, she felt something like peace. She thought about Marcus's proposition, turning it over in her mind like a puzzle. Marriage for protection seemed mercenary, but there had been something else in his eyes when he'd spoken to her, something that suggested his interest went beyond mere practicality. The scandal in Boston had taught her that a woman's reputation could be destroyed by circumstances beyond her control. Thomas Whitmore, the Academy's married headmaster, had pursued her relentlessly despite her clear refusals. When his wife discovered his advances and blamed Evangeline for encouraging them, the resulting gossip had cost her everything: her position, her reputation, her prospects for marriage to any respectable man. But here, in this place Marcus had helped build from nothing, perhaps she could build something new as well. The next morning brought her answer in an unexpected form. She was preparing lessons when shouting erupted from the street. Through the window, she saw 3 rough-looking men on horseback confronting Tom Caldwell outside his store. Even from a distance, she could see Tom's fear. Before she could react, Marcus appeared as if materialized from the air itself. He moved between the mounted men and Tom with the fluid confidence of someone who'd faced such confrontations countless times. "Gentlemen," his voice carried clearly in the crisp morning air, "you're welcome in Ironwood Creek as long as you conduct yourselves peacefully. I trust that's your intention." The lead rider, a wiry man with cold eyes and a sneer that spoke of casual cruelty, leaned forward in his saddle. "We're here on business for Mr. Carmichael Mining. Seems your storekeeper here owes some debts that need settling." "Tom." Marcus's voice remained calm, but Evangeline could see the subtle shift in his stance that suggested readiness for violence. "I don't owe them nothing, Sheriff," Tom called out, his voice shaking with anger and fear. "They're trying to force me to sell my lot for half what it's worth, claiming I owe for supplies I never ordered." "Sounds like a misunderstanding," Marcus said mildly. "Why don't you boys ride back to your boss and tell him Sheriff Donovan would be happy to review any documentation of debts owed by citizens of Ironwood Creek. Proper documentation, filed through proper legal channels." The wiry man's hand drifted toward his gun. "Maybe we don't need to involve lawyers, Sheriff. Maybe we can settle this between men." The silence that followed stretched like a wire about to snap. Then Marcus smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "Son, I've been settling things between men since before you learned to shave. You sure that's the conversation you want to have?" Something in his tone made all 3 men shift uncomfortably in their saddles. The leader's hand moved away from his weapon. "This ain't over," he growled, wheeling his horse around. "Mr. Buchanan don't like being put off. Mr. Buchanan is welcome to visit me at the sheriff's office any time he likes." Marcus replied pleasantly. Office hours are posted on the door. As the riders departed, kicking up dust in their wake, Marcus helped Tom check his inventory and took careful notes about the claimed debt. Watching him work, Evangeline saw the careful attention to detail that had built this town, the methodical approach that had turned a lawless crossroads into a thriving community. She also saw the way his shoulders tensed as he watched the men disappear over the hill, the subtle signs of a man preparing for war. That afternoon, she found him at his workbench behind the house, shaping what looked like a chair leg with movements that spoke of years of practice. Wood shavings curled away from his tools like golden ribbons, and the scent of fresh timber filled the air. "Beautiful work," she said, and he looked up, surprise flickering across his features. "Just keeping my hands busy." He set down his plane and straightened, wiping sawdust from his palms. "Helps me think." "What are you thinking about?" His gray eyes met hers directly. "Whether I have the right to ask a woman to tie her fate to mine when trouble's coming." Evangeline stepped closer to the workbench, running her hand along the smooth wood. "This chair, is it part of a set?" "Dining room set. Table and 8 chairs." His voice was carefully neutral. "Been working on it for 2 years, piece by piece." "For your house." "For when I had reason to fill a dining room." He picked up the chair leg again, testing its weight. "Foolish, maybe, building furniture for a family I didn't have." "Not foolish. Hopeful." She watched his hands as he worked, noting the gentleness with which he handled the delicate wood despite his size. "Marcus, your proposition yesterday, was it only about protection?" His hands stilled on the wood. "No. What else?" He set down the chair leg and turned to face her fully. "Honestly, I've been alone for 8 years, building this place, protecting these people, making decisions that affect hundreds of lives. It's good work, necessary work, but it's lonely work." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "When I saw you step off that stage, something in me recognized something in you. Like you were the missing piece I didn't know I was looking for." The honesty in his voice made her breath catch. "That's quite a risk to take on someone you've known for 2 days." "I've built everything I have on calculated risks. The difference is, this time, the stakes aren't just mine." They stood in the gathering dusk, wood shavings scattered around their feet, the sound of his tools and the distant murmur of the town settling in for the night. Evangeline thought about the life she'd left behind, the whispered gossip, the closed doors, the constant fear of discovery. Then she thought about the children who needed her, the community that had welcomed her, and the man who'd offered her not just protection, but partnership. "If I agreed," she said carefully, "what would the terms be?" "Whatever terms make you comfortable. Separate bedrooms until or unless you decided otherwise. Your own space, your own income from teaching. Full partnership in decisions about the house, the land, our future." He paused. "And if you ever decided you wanted to leave, I'd make sure you had the means to go anywhere you chose." "That's generous." "It's practical. A marriage based on coercion isn't a marriage at all." Evangeline nodded slowly, her mind made up before she'd fully realized it. "Then yes, Marcus, I'll marry you." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after a long night, transforming his stern features into something approaching boyish joy. "You mean it?" "I mean it." She found herself smiling back. "Though I have one condition." "Name it." "I want to help you finish that dining room set. If we're going to be partners, I should contribute to building our home." Marcus's eyes lit up with something that might have been wonder. "Do you know woodworking?" "I know determination and careful hands. You can teach me the rest." That evening, the town buzzed with news of the engagement. Mrs. Caldwell immediately began planning a wedding feast. Dr. Morrison offered to lend her mother's wedding dress, and Tom Caldwell started taking measurements for a new suit for Marcus. "How quickly can we arrange the ceremony?" Marcus asked as they walked together after supper, the familiar weight of his presence both comforting and thrilling. "Is there a rush?" "Buchanan will be back soon, and I want our union legal and binding before he arrives. A sheriff's wife has protections and standing that a single woman doesn't." Evangeline nodded, understanding the practical necessity even as part of her wished for more romantic reasons for haste. 3 days? That should give us time to make proper arrangements." 3 days. He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Evangeline, I want you to know, whatever this starts as, I hope it becomes something real, something lasting." Standing there in the starlight, looking up at this man who'd built a kingdom with his own hands and offered to share it with her. Evangeline felt the first stirrings of something she'd thought lost forever: hope. I hope so too, Marcus. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. The entire town seemed determined to make their wedding a celebration worthy of their sheriff and their new teacher. Women appeared with offers of flowers, food, and assistance. Men worked extra hours to ensure the church was perfect and the reception hall ready. Marcus spent his evenings teaching Evangeline the basics of woodworking, his large hands guiding hers as she learned to feel the grain of the wood, to let the tool do the work, to trust in the process. Standing behind her as she used the plane, his arms bracketing hers, she became acutely aware of his strength, his warmth, the careful control he exercised in all things. "You're a natural," he murmured as she successfully shaped a piece of maple for a chair spindle. "Most people fight the wood. You're learning to work with it. Good thing, since I'll be working with the most stubborn piece of timber in Montana territory," she teased, and was rewarded with his rare, genuine laugh. "Stubborn, maybe, but solid." His voice held a note she couldn't quite identify, and willing to bend when it matters. The night before their wedding, Evangeline sat in her rooms above the store, trying to process the magnitude of what she was about to do. In 3 months, she'd gone from respected teacher to social pariah to frontier bride. Tomorrow, she would marry a man she'd known for less than a week, pledging to build a life in a place she'd never heard of until recently. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Marcus on the landing, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I'm sorry to disturb you so late. I wanted to give you this before tomorrow." He held out a small wooden box, similar to the one he'd made for her school supplies, but more delicate, carved with a pattern of wild roses. Inside, nestled on blue velvet, was a ring unlike any she'd ever seen. The band was crafted from gold and silver twisted together, set with a deep blue sapphire that caught the lamplight like captured starfire. "It was my grandmother's," he said quietly. "She came west with my grandfather in 1847. Lost everything twice to fire and flood, but they kept building until they had something that lasted." He lifted the ring from the box with careful fingers. "I'd be honored if you'd wear it." Evangeline held out her hand, and he slipped the ring onto her finger with a reverence that made her throat tight. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "It's beautiful, Marcus. I'll treasure it. Tomorrow changes everything," he said, still holding her hand. "After tomorrow, you'll be under my protection, but you'll also be tied to my fate. If I fall, if this kingdom I've built crumbles, you'll fall with me. Then we'd better make sure it doesn't crumble." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles just above the ring. "Sleep well, Evangeline. Tomorrow we begin building something new." As he disappeared down the stairs, Evangeline closed the door and leaned against it, her heart racing. The ring felt warm on her finger, substantial and real in a way that made their approaching marriage feel less like a practical arrangement and more like destiny. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Marcus Donovan, wife to the sheriff who'd built a kingdom in the wilderness. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The morning of her wedding dawned crisp and clear, with September sunlight streaming through the mountains like liquid gold. Evangeline woke before sunrise, her grandmother's ring catching the early light as she pressed her hand to her racing heart. In 6 hours, she would be married to a man who'd promised her partnership, protection, and the chance for something real to grow between them. Dr. Patricia Morrison arrived at dawn with Mrs. Caldwell and Sarah Chun, carrying between them a wedding dress that took Evangeline's breath away. The ivory silk had been Patricia's mother's, brought west in 1855 and carefully preserved in cedar and lavender. "Every bride deserves to feel beautiful on her wedding day," Patricia said as they helped her into the gown. The dress fit as if made for her, the bodice snug but comfortable, the skirt falling in elegant folds that rustled like whispered promises. Sarah pinned wildflowers in her hair, mountain laurel and Indian paintbrush that Marcus had picked before dawn and left outside her door with a note. "For my bride, as beautiful and resilient as Montana itself." "You look like a princess," breathed Lucy Chun, who'd been granted special permission to watch the preparations. Looking at herself in the mirror, Evangeline hardly recognized the confident woman staring back. Gone was the hunted expression she'd worn since fleeing Boston. In its place was something that looked remarkably like hope. The church filled quickly, with what seemed like the entire population of Ironwood Creek crowding into the pews. Evangeline had expected a simple ceremony with perhaps a dozen witnesses, but as she stood at the back of the church with Tom Caldwell, who'd offered to walk her down the aisle, she saw faces turn toward her with genuine joy and anticipation. Then the doors at the front opened, and Marcus appeared. If she'd thought him impressive before, he was magnificent now. He'd clearly been to the barber, his dark hair neatly trimmed and his jaw clean-shaven, revealing the strong lines of his face. His black suit fit his broad frame perfectly, and when he turned to watch her approach, the expression in his storm-gray eyes made her knees weak. Pastor McKinnon opened his worn Bible as they stood before the altar, but Evangeline barely heard the familiar words. All her attention was focused on the man beside her, on the way his voice rumbled through the traditional vows, on the moment when he lifted her hand and spoke his own promises. "Evangeline Rose Hartwell," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the packed church, "I promise to protect you, to provide for you, to respect your mind and value your counsel. I promise to be faithful in thought and deed, to share my burdens and my joys, and to build with you a home worthy of the love I hope we'll find together." When it was her turn, she looked up into his face and spoke from her heart. "Marcus James Donovan, I promise to stand beside you in whatever comes, to share in the building of our future, and to trust in the man you've shown yourself to be. I promise to bring all of myself to this union, my strength, my mind, my heart, and to believe in the possibility of love." The kiss that sealed their union was gentle, reverent, but when Marcus's lips touched hers, Evangeline felt something ignite in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with propriety and everything to do with the man who was now her husband. The celebration that followed filled the church hall with music, laughter, and enough food to feed twice their number. Tom Caldwell produced a fiddle, Dr. Morrison surprised everyone by revealing a talent for the piano, and soon half the town was dancing while the other half clapped along. Marcus proved to be an unexpectedly graceful dancer, guiding her through waltzes and reels with the same careful attention he brought to his woodworking. When the music slowed and he drew her closer, she could smell the pine soap he favored and feel the steady beat of his heart against her palm. "Any regrets?" he murmured as they swayed together. "None," she answered honestly. "You? Only that we didn't have longer to court properly." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Though I suppose we have the rest of our lives for that." As the evening wound down, Marcus helped her gather her belongings from the rooms above the store. The trunk containing her few remaining possessions seemed pitifully small compared to the furniture he'd crafted over the years, but he handled each item with the same care he'd shown her grandmother's ring. "This is beautiful work," he said, examining a sampler sheet embroidered during her teaching years. "Did you make this?" "I did, though it seems rather modest compared to dining room sets and school desks." "Beauty is beauty, whether it's carved in wood or stitched in silk." He wrapped the piece carefully in tissue paper. "I'd like to hang this in the house, if you wouldn't mind." "Our house." The words sent a thrill through her that she tried to keep from showing. "I'd be honored." The walk to Marcus's house, their house now, took only 10 minutes, but felt like crossing a threshold into an entirely new life. He'd lit lamps in the windows, and the warm glow made the structure look even more welcoming than it had from a distance. "Before we go in," Marcus said, stopping at the porch steps, "I want you to know that I've prepared the guest room for you. Clean linens, fresh flowers, your own washstand and mirror. You don't have to. That is, there's no expectation that." Evangeline silenced him by placing her fingers gently over his lips. "Marcus, we're married. Legally, socially, and spiritually. I understand this began as a practical arrangement, but I want you to know that my promise today was real. All of it." Something shifted in his expression, hope and desire warring with careful restraint. "Evangeline, show me our home, husband." The interior of the house exceeded even her elevated expectations. The front door opened into a spacious living area with a stone fireplace large enough to warm the entire ground floor. Hand-hewn beams supported the ceiling, and every piece of furniture showed Marcus's craftsmanship. Chairs with perfectly fitted joints, tables smooth as glass, built-in shelves that looked like they'd grown from the walls themselves. The kitchen featured a cook stove that must have cost a fortune to transport from back east, cabinets with glass fronts to display dishes, and a table surrounded by two of the chairs from the dining set he'd been working on. "The rest of the chairs are in my workshop," he said, following her gaze. "I wanted to finish them before bringing them inside." Upstairs, he showed her the guest room first, a lovely space with windows facing east to catch the morning sun, furnished with a bed that looked like it belonged in a fine hotel, and a writing desk positioned to take advantage of the light. "This is beautiful, Marcus, but—" She turned to face him, gathering her courage. "Where do you sleep?" He hesitated, then gestured toward the end of the hall. "Master bedroom's there. I built it larger than I needed, thinking someday." He trailed off, uncertainty flickering across his features. Evangeline walked to the door he'd indicated and stepped inside. If the rest of the house was impressive, this room was a masterpiece. The bed was massive, necessary for a man of Marcus's size, crafted from dark walnut with posts that nearly reached the 10-foot ceiling. A matching wardrobe stood against one wall, while windows on two sides offered views of the mountains and the town below. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Absolutely perfect. Evangeline, you don't have to." She turned to face him. This man who'd built her a kingdom and offered to share it without asking for anything she wasn't ready to give. "Marcus, I need you to understand something. I came west running from shame and scandal, carrying nothing but fear and the hope that distance might heal what felt permanently broken. In 1 week, you've given me safety, purpose, community, and something I thought I'd lost forever, the chance to build a real life with someone who sees value in what I have to offer." She moved closer, reaching up to touch his face, feeling the slight roughness of his shaven jaw under her palm. "I don't want to sleep in the guest room tonight. I want to sleep here, with my husband, and wake up tomorrow ready to build our future together." The kiss that followed was nothing like the gentle ceremony at the church. This was fire and promise, need and tenderness wrapped together in something that stole her breath and made her pulse race. Marcus's arms came around her, strong and sure, and for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, Evangeline felt completely safe. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted this, wanted you, since the moment I saw you. But I need you to be sure." "I'm sure." She smiled up at him, marveling at how right this felt. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't spend all night in the workshop carving chair legs instead of sleeping." His laugh was warm and rich, echoing through the room that was truly theirs now. "Well, when you put it like that." The next morning, Evangeline woke to the sound of axes and hammers, and the scent of coffee and bacon drifting up from the kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold, and she lay for a moment marveling at how different the world looked when you belonged somewhere. Marcus was already up. She could hear him moving around downstairs with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to early mornings. When she finally made her way to the kitchen, she found him at the stove, wearing rough work clothes and an apron that looked comically small on his large frame. "Good morning, Mrs. Donovan," he said, turning to smile at her. "I hope you slept well." "Very well, Mr. Donovan." The name felt natural on her lips, like something she'd been practicing her whole life. "Though I'm surprised to find you cooking. I thought that would be my responsibility. Marriage is a partnership, remember? Besides, I've been feeding myself for 8 years. No sense stopping now just because I've got a wife." He gestured toward the table, where he'd set out plates, coffee cups, and a jar of honey. "Though I'll warn you, my cooking is purely functional. Nothing fancy." The breakfast was simple but perfectly prepared. Eggs scrambled with wild onions, bacon cooked to the ideal balance of crispy and tender, biscuits that were flaky and golden. As they ate, Marcus outlined his plans for the day. "I need to ride out to the Morrison Ranch. They've had trouble with rustlers, and I want to investigate before it spreads. Should be back by evening." He paused, studying her face. "Will you be all right alone? I can ask Mrs. Caldwell too." "Marcus." She reached across the table to cover his hand with hers. "I'm perfectly capable of spending a day alone. I have lesson plans to review, and I thought I might explore the house properly, maybe start thinking about where my things should go." "Our things," he corrected gently. "And explore all you like. The house is yours now too." After he left, badge pinned to his vest and rifle across his saddle, Evangeline spent the morning walking through their home with new eyes. She found Marcus's bedroom, their bedroom, filled with evidence of his solitary life. A single chair by the window, books stacked on the nightstand, clothes hung neatly in half the wardrobe. There was space for her everywhere, as if he'd been unconsciously preparing for her arrival for years. In the workshop behind the house, she discovered the extent of his craftsmanship. Half-finished furniture filled the space, not just the dining room set, but a rocking chair with intricate carved details, a child's cradle that made her heart skip, and what looked like the beginnings of a desk sized for a woman's use. She was running her hand along the smooth surface of the desk when hoofbeats announced visitors. Through the window, she saw 3 riders approaching, the same men who'd confronted Tom Caldwell the week before. Her blood chilled as she recognized the wiry leader with the cold eyes. Evangeline quickly made her way back to the house, checking that the doors were locked and wishing Marcus had thought to leave her with some means of protection. The men dismounted and approached the front porch with the swagger of those accustomed to intimidating others. "Mrs. Donovan." The leader's voice carried a mocking tone that made her skin crawl. "Wade Buchanan, foreman for Carmichael Mining. I hear congratulations are in order." She moved to the window but stayed well back from the glass. "Mr. Buchanan, my husband isn't home at present. Perhaps you could return when—" "Oh, I think this conversation is better held between us, don't you?" His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "See, your husband's been interfering with company business, and I thought maybe his new wife could help him understand the benefits of cooperation." "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean." "Of course you do. You're an educated woman. Boston Female Seminary, wasn't it? Smart enough to understand that Carmichael Mining has plans for this area, and those plans don't include stubborn sheriffs or the people they protect." Evangeline's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. "Mr. Buchanan, you're trespassing on private property. I must ask you to leave." Buchanan's laugh was ugly. "Trespassing? Lady, by the time we're done here, there won't be any private property to trespass on. Carmichael's got territorial backing for eminent domain seizures. All perfectly legal. Legal seizures require proper documentation and fair compensation. Fair's a relative term." One of his men had moved to the side of the house, and she could hear him testing the windows. "See, sometimes accidents happen to people who don't cooperate. Houses burn down. People get hurt. Terrible tragedies, but these things happen on the frontier." The threat was clear, and Evangeline felt fear spike through her even as anger began to build. This man was threatening not just her and Marcus, but the entire community they'd both come to love. "My husband will be back soon," she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Will he?" Funny thing about that Morrison Ranch. Awful lot of places a man could run into trouble between here and there. Mountain roads can be dangerous, especially for someone riding alone. The implication hit her like a physical blow. They'd done something to Marcus, or were planning to. Her fear crystallized into cold determination. "What do you want?" "Smart question. I want your husband to stop interfering with company business. I want him to understand that his little kingdom here exists at our sufferance. And I want you to help convince him that cooperation is in everyone's best interest. And if we refuse?" Buchanan's smile turned predatory. "Then you'll find out just how quickly a kingdom can fall." The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted the conversation, and Evangeline's heart leaped as she recognized Marcus's horse. But her relief turned to alarm when she saw him slumped in the saddle, one arm hanging limply at his side. "Marcus!" She was out the door before she could think, running toward him despite Buchanan's presence. Marcus straightened as she approached, and she could see blood on his shirt, a cut along his temple. But his eyes were alert and furious as they fixed on Buchanan. "Gentlemen," he said mildly, dismounting with careful movements that suggested injury. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Just paying a social call on your lovely wife," Buchanan replied. "Sharing some information about upcoming changes in the area." "Changes?" Marcus moved to stand beside Evangeline, and she could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a forge. "Carmichael Mining's got territorial approval for expansion. Eminent domain authority for any properties necessary to the mining operation." Buchanan's voice was smooth as oil. "Of course, we're reasonable men, willing to pay fair prices for willing sellers. And for unwilling ones, well, that's where things get complicated." Buchanan mounted his horse, gathering the reins with deliberate slowness. Accidents happen, Sheriff. People get hurt. Properties get damaged. All very unfortunate, but that's frontier life. Marcus stepped forward, and despite his injury, his presence seemed to fill the yard. Mr. Buchanan, let me make something very clear. This is my land, my home, and my wife. Any threat to those things is a threat to me personally, and I take personal threats very seriously. Do you now? Buchanan's hand drifted toward his gun, even when you're outnumbered and injured. Especially then. The silence stretched taut as a wire, and Evangeline held her breath. Then Buchanan laughed, spurring his horse backward. Enjoy your kingdom while it lasts, Sheriff. And Mrs. Donovan, you might want to consider whether you married the right man. Widows have a hard time on the frontier. As the three men rode away, Evangeline turned to examine Marcus's injuries. The cut on his temple was shallow but still bleeding, and when she helped him remove his shirt, she found deep bruises along his ribs and a bullet graze on his upper arm. What happened? She asked, fetching water and clean cloth from the kitchen. Ambush on the way to Morrison's place. Three men with rifles, positioned in the rocks above the trail. He winced as she cleaned the graze. I was lucky. They were better at setting traps than springing them. The same men who were just here? Different ones, but working for the same boss. Marcus caught her hand as she worked. Evangeline, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Buchanan's not making idle threats. Then we'd better make sure we're ready for whatever comes next. He studied her face, searching for signs of fear or doubt. You're not thinking of leaving? Are you planning to abandon your kingdom? Never. Then neither am I. She tied off the bandage with perhaps more force than necessary. We're partners, remember? That means facing whatever comes together. That afternoon, while Marcus rested, Evangeline walked into town to share what had happened with Dr. Morrison and the Caldwells. Within hours, word had spread through Ironwood Creek, and by evening, Marcus's house was filled with concerned citizens. They can't just take our land, protested Sarah Chun. We've got legal claims, proper deeds. Eminent domain trumps individual claims if they can prove public necessity, Dr. Morrison said grimly. And with territorial backing, they can define public necessity however they like. So what do we do? Tom Caldwell's usually cheerful face was grave. Pack up and move on. We fight. Marcus's voice cut through the worried murmurs. We've built something good here, something worth defending. I'm not handing it over to men like Buchanan without a fight. How do we fight the territorial government? Someone called out. We don't fight the government. We fight corruption. Marcus moved to the center of the room, and Evangeline saw the natural leader who'd built this community from nothing. Buchanan's got political connections, but so do we. Dr. Morrison, your father was territorial judge before he retired. Tom, your brother works for the land office in Helena. We start there, legal challenges, proper documentation, appeals to higher authority. And if the legal route doesn't work? This from James Chun, Sarah's husband. Marcus's expression hardened. Then we defend our homes by whatever means necessary. The meeting continued late into the night, with committees formed and responsibilities assigned. Evangeline found herself appointed to coordinate with other threatened communities, using her education and letter-writing skills to build a broader coalition. As the last visitors departed, she and Marcus stood on their porch watching the lights of the town below. The community they'd both chosen was under threat, but instead of feeling defeated, Evangeline felt energized. We're going to win this, she said quietly. What makes you so certain? Because Buchanan made a mistake. He threatened the wrong woman, and he underestimated the wrong man. She turned to face Marcus, this mountain of a man who'd become her partner in every sense of the word. He thinks he can intimidate us into giving up what we've built. But he doesn't understand that some things are worth fighting for. Marcus pulled her close, mindful of his injured arm. And what would those things be, Mrs. Donovan? Home. Family. The future we're building together. She smiled up at him. Our kingdom. The kiss that followed was fierce with promise and determination. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. The sheriff who'd built a kingdom and the teacher who'd found her place at his side. Over the next 2 weeks, their coalition grew. Word spread to other communities facing similar pressure from Carmichael Mining, and responses began arriving from territorial officials. Dr. Morrison's father agreed to review their legal position, while Tom's brother started investigating the company's claims and documentation. Meanwhile, Marcus increased patrols and organized the town's defenses. Evangeline threw herself into teaching with renewed energy, knowing that education was another form of resistance, that children who could read and think and question were less likely to be victimized by men like Buchanan. In the evenings, she and Marcus worked together in his shop, putting finishing touches on the dining room furniture. The work gave them both peace, the rhythm of shared labor, and quiet conversation a refuge from the brewing storm. "There," Marcus said, running his hand along the completed table. "What do you think?" Evangeline traced the smooth wood grain, marveling at the craftsmanship. The table was massive enough to seat 12, with elegant lines that spoke of both strength and beauty. The matching chairs were works of art, each one perfectly fitted and finished. "It's magnificent. A table for a dynasty. For a family," he corrected gently. "However large that family grows to be." The implication made her pulse quicken. They'd been married 3 weeks, and while their physical relationship had progressed naturally from tentative exploration to passionate union, they'd avoided discussing the future in concrete terms. "Marcus," she began, then stopped, unsure how to voice her thoughts. "What is it? Do you ever think about children? About what kind of father you'd be?" His hands stilled on the wood. "Every day since I married you." He looked up to meet her eyes. "Why? Are you?" "Not yet, but I hope to be someday." She moved around the table to stand beside him. "I keep thinking about that cradle in the corner and wondering." "Wondering what?" "Wondering if you made it because you were hoping, or just because you like creating beautiful things." Marcus set down his tools and turned to face her fully. "I made it because a man needs to believe in the future, even when the present is uncertain. I made it because I hoped that someday I'd have reason to use it." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I made it because I wanted to believe that someone like you might someday choose to build a life with someone like me." The honesty in his voice made her throat tight. "Someone like you? A man with blood on his hands and scars on his soul. A man who spent 8 years building walls to keep the darkness out." Evangeline reached up to frame his face with her hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Marcus Donovan, you are the finest man I've ever known. You've built a community where children can grow up safe, where families can prosper, where people can build dreams. If that's not worth believing in, nothing is. Even with everything that's coming, even knowing that loving me might put you in danger. Especially then." She pulled his head down until their foreheads touched. "Besides, I happen to be partial to men who build kingdoms. And I have a feeling our children will be too." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise, transforming his stern features into something approaching boyish wonder. Our children, however many we're blessed with." The kiss that followed was tender and promising, full of dreams and determination. They were building more than furniture in this workshop. They were building a future, piece by carefully crafted piece. 2 days later, that future was put to the test when Buchanan returned with a dozen men and a document bearing territorial seals. The document Buchanan thrust at Marcus bore the territorial seal, but Dr. Morrison's father had taught them enough about legal procedure to spot the irregularities immediately. The eminent domain claim was dated incorrectly, signed by officials who'd been out of office for months, and contained geographic descriptions that would have included half of Montana territory. "This is a fraud," Marcus said calmly, handing the papers back. "A poor one at that." Buchanan's face flushed red. "You calling me a liar, Sheriff? I'm calling you a fool if you think we're stupid enough to fall for forged documents." Marcus stood on his porch with Evangeline beside him, facing down a dozen armed men with the quiet confidence of someone who'd faced worse odds and survived. "The real question is whether you're fool enough to continue this charade now that we've called your bluff. Maybe we don't need papers." One of Buchanan's men, a brutish-looking character with dead eyes, let his hand drift toward his gun. "Maybe we just take what we want." The sound of rifles being cocked echoed from multiple directions, and Buchanan spun to find himself surrounded. Tom Caldwell emerged from behind the workshop, Dr. Morrison stepped out from the cover of the barn, and James Chun rose from the tall grass at the property line. All held weapons with the easy familiarity of men who'd learned to shoot to survive. "Gentlemen," Marcus said pleasantly, "allow me to introduce the Ironwood Creek Improvement Committee. They take community development very seriously." More figures appeared. Sarah Chun with a shotgun that looked comically large in her small hands, but which she clearly knew how to use. Pastor McKinnon with a hunting rifle. even elderly Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house carrying what appeared to be a cavalry saber. "You're outnumbered, Buchanan," Marcus continued. "You're outgunned. And you're definitely outmatched. I suggest you ride back to whoever's paying you and explain that Ironwood Creek isn't for sale." Buchanan's eyes darted from one armed citizen to another, calculating odds that clearly weren't in his favor. "This isn't over, Donovan. Carmichael's got resources you can't imagine. Then he should use them more wisely. Next time you come to my town with fraudulent documents and violent threats, I'll arrest you for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted extortion. And I'll make sure the charges stick." For a moment, Buchanan looked ready to fight despite the odds. Then his survival instincts overcame his pride, and he jerked his horse's head around. "Mount up," he barked to his men. "We're leaving." As the riders departed in a cloud of dust and muttered curses, the community slowly emerged from their positions. But instead of celebration, Marcus felt the weight of certainty that this was only the beginning. "He'll be back," Dr. Morrison said, voicing what they all knew. "Count on it," Marcus agreed. "But next time, we'll be ready." The next week brought a stream of visitors to Ironwood Creek. Territorial marshals investigating reports of mining company fraud, newspaper reporters drawn by stories of frontier communities standing up to corporate intimidation, and officials from Helena looking into Carmichael's territorial connections. Evangeline threw herself into coordinating their response, writing letters to territorial officials, documenting the company's threats and illegal activities, and corresponding with other threatened communities. Her education and articulate writing proved invaluable in presenting their case to authorities. "You're a natural at this," Marcus observed one evening, finding her at the kitchen table surrounded by papers and correspondence. "Political organizing, I mean. I prefer to think of it as teaching on a larger scale," she replied, not looking up from the letter she was composing. "Education is about empowering people to think for themselves, to question authority, to demand better. This is just education applied to civic engagement." Marcus moved behind her chair, reading over her shoulder. The letter was addressed to the territorial governor himself, laying out a detailed case against Carmichael Mining's practices and requesting a formal investigation. "This is brilliant," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You're making arguments I never would have thought of. That's what partnership means. We each bring our strengths." She leaned back against him, enjoying the solid warmth of his presence. "You keep us safe, I fight the political battles. Together, we're formidable." The response to their campaign exceeded their most optimistic hopes. The territorial governor announced a formal investigation into mining company practices. 3 territorial marshals arrived to review evidence of fraud and intimidation, and newspapers across the region picked up the story of the frontier community that refused to be bullied. But Buchanan's employers weren't content to fight only in courtrooms and newspapers. The attack came at dawn on a crisp October morning. Evangeline was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when the sound of gunfire erupted from the direction of town. Marcus was up and armed before the echoes faded, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been expecting trouble. "Stay in the house," he ordered, strapping on his gun belt. "Lock the doors and don't open them for anyone but me." Through the window, Evangeline watched him mount his horse and ride toward town at a gallop. Smoke was rising from multiple locations, and the sound of gunfire continued in sporadic bursts. Her instinct was to follow, to help however she could, but she knew Marcus was right. She'd be more liability than asset in a gunfight. Instead, she did what she could from the house. She prepared medical supplies in case of wounded, gathered extra ammunition from Marcus's gun cabinet, and positioned herself at the upstairs window where she could watch the approaches to their property. The battle for Ironwood Creek lasted 3 hours. From her vantage point, Evangeline could see riders moving through the streets, muzzle flashes from buildings, and the organized response of townspeople who'd prepared for exactly this scenario. Marcus had spent months training them, organizing them, turning ordinary citizens into an effective defensive force. When the gunfire finally stopped, the silence was almost more terrifying than the violence had been. Evangeline waited, heart hammering, until she saw a familiar figure riding slowly up the hill toward their house. Marcus looked exhausted, his shirt torn and bloody, but he was upright in the saddle and moving under his own power. She was out the door and running toward him before he'd fully stopped. "Are you hurt?" How bad is it? What happened? I'm fine, he assured her, dismounting stiffly. Few scratches, nothing serious. The town. Tell me. Buchanan brought 20 men this time. Hit 3 targets simultaneously. The bank, the sheriff's office, and the school. His jaw tightened. They were trying to destroy the heart of what we'd built. The school. Evangeline's heart clenched. Is it? Damaged, but salvageable. They broke windows, overturned desks, tried to set fire to the books. But we got there in time to stop the worst of it. And Buchanan? Marcus's expression grew grim. Dead, along with 6 of his men. The rest surrendered or ran. He paused, studying her face. It's over, Evangeline. The investigation will continue, but the immediate threat is finished. She should have felt relief, but instead, she felt hollow. 6 men dead. Was it worth it? Ask me that question when our children are sitting in that schoolhouse, learning to read and think and dream, Marcus said quietly. Ask me when other communities stand up to men like Buchanan because they know it can be done. Ask me when decent people can build lives without fear of having them stolen by corrupt officials and greedy corporations. Evangeline nodded, understanding the weight of what they'd fought for. This hadn't been about land or money. It had been about the right to build something good and have it endure. The aftermath brought territorial officials, newspaper reporters, and a steady stream of visitors from other communities facing similar threats. Ironwood Creek became a symbol of frontier resistance, proof that ordinary people could stand up to powerful interests and win. But for Evangeline, the most meaningful moment came 2 weeks later, when she stood in the restored schoolhouse watching 18 children take their seats at the repaired desks. The windows had been replaced, the books reorganized, and normal life had resumed. Mrs. Donovan? Lucy Chin raised her hand. Are the bad men really gone? Yes, Lucy, they're really gone. And we're safe now? Evangeline looked out the window toward the sheriff's office, where Marcus was visible through the open door, working at his desk with the steady patience that characterized everything he did. We're safe now, she confirmed. Sheriff Donovan made sure of that. That evening, as autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Evangeline and Marcus walked through their town. The damage from the attack had been repaired, new families were arriving weekly, and plans were underway for expanding both the school and the church. No regrets, Marcus asked as they paused outside the schoolhouse. Only that we didn't meet sooner. She slipped her hand into his, feeling the calluses that spoke of years of building and protecting. Though perhaps we both needed to become who we are before we could recognize what we had together. They walked home in comfortable silence, past houses filled with light and laughter, past workshops where the sounds of construction continued even after dark. The kingdom Marcus had built was no longer his alone. It belonged to all of them now, a community of people who'd chosen to stand together rather than fall separately. At home, they found a package waiting on the porch. Inside was a letter from the territorial governor, officially commending the citizens of Ironwood Creek for their courage in standing up to corruption, along with a formal appointment making Marcus territorial marshal for the region. Marshal Donovan, Evangeline said, trying out the title. I like the sound of that. Do you? Because the job comes with a house in Helena, if we wanted it. A chance to be part of territorial government, to help shape policy for the whole region. Evangeline considered the offer, imagining the opportunities it would represent, the chance to influence education policy across the territory, to work for reforms that would benefit countless communities like theirs. What do you think? She asked. Marcus looked around their home, the furniture he'd crafted by hand, the rooms they'd filled with love and laughter, the view of the town they'd both helped build. I think we've already built our kingdom here, he said finally, and I think it needs us to stay and help it grow. Besides, Evangeline added with a smile, someone needs to finish teaching those 18 children, and someone needs to complete that cradle in the workshop. Marcus's eyes widened. Evangeline, are you saying? I'm saying that kingdoms need heirs, and ours will need someone to inherit all this beauty you've created. She placed his hand over her still flat stomach. Dr. Morrison confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby, Marcus. The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed, both of them giddy with the promise of new life. A baby, he whispered against her hair. Our baby. The first of many, I hope. She pulled back to look into his eyes. This kingdom needs a dynasty, after all. 6 months later, Evangeline stood in their completed dining room, watching Marcus set their daughter in the cradle he'd finished the week before her birth. Little Rose Evangeline Donovan was perfect, tiny and pink, and utterly content in her father's massive hands. "She's beautiful," Dr. Morrison said, packing away her medical supplies after confirming that both mother and baby were thriving. "She's got her father's determination and her mother's intelligence, if those eyes are any indication." The house filled quickly with visitors bringing gifts and congratulations. Sarah Chun arrived with a quilt she'd been secretly working on for months. Tom and Mrs. Caldwell brought a high chair crafted in Marcus's workshop, and Pastor McKinnon offered a blessing that brought tears to Evangeline's eyes. As evening settled over their mountain kingdom, Marcus and Evangeline sat together in the rocking chair he'd built during her pregnancy. Rose slept peacefully in her father's arms while her parents watched the lights of Ironwood Creek twinkle below. "Any regrets now?" Marcus asked softly. "Only that I ever doubted that love could find me in the most unexpected places." Evangeline leaned against his shoulder, marveling at how perfectly her life had turned out. "I came west running from scandal and shame, and instead I found purpose, community, and the most wonderful man in all the territories." "I spent 8 years building a kingdom," Marcus replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But it wasn't complete until I found my queen." Outside their windows, Ironwood Creek settled into peaceful sleep. A community of families building futures, children growing up safe and educated, and dreams taking root in the fertile soil of freedom and determination. The sheriff and the schoolteacher had found their happily ever after, not in spite of the challenges they'd faced, but because of them. They'd built something beautiful together, a marriage, a family, a community, a legacy that would endure long after the mountains themselves crumbled. And in the workshop behind their house, a new project was taking shape, a larger dining table, because their kingdom was still growing, and they needed room for all the dreams yet to come.